map of the United States is changing dramatically. 10 cities stand on the brink of collapse, places where daily life has become unbearable and where survival itself is at stake. This is not about simple statistics or alarmist headlines. It is about entire communities that have been devoured by violence, poverty, pollution, industrial abandonment and climate change. Cities that were once symbols of prosperity and hope have now become living warnings of what happens when the system fails. Streets that once promised a future now lead to emptiness. Schools that were once filled with children now remain closed. Hospitals that were once a refuge of life now struggle to stay open with minimal resources. Entire families flee, leaving behind houses, memories and roots. I didn't believe it either, until I walked those streets and saw how the American dream had turned into a nightmare. Now I will show you the 10 cities in the United States where nobody should live in the year 2026. And here's why. Let's start with number 10, Detroit, Michigan. The city that never recovered Detroit was, for much of the 20th century, the beating heart of the American automobile industry. Factories roared, workers thrived, and the city became a symbol of modernity and progress. At its peak, Detroit had nearly 2 million residents, vibrant neighbourhoods, and a cultural life that reflected the strength of the working class. But that golden age ended decades ago. The collapse of the auto industry, combined with political corruption and mismanagement, left Detroit in ruins. In the year 2026, the city is still struggling to rise from bankruptcy, depopulation, and violence. Walking through Detroit today is to wander through a landscape of abandonment. Entire blocks are made up of empty houses with broken windows and collapsed roofs. Schools are closed, hospitals barely function, and businesses shut down one after another. The feeling is that of a museum of industrial failure, where every corner recalls what once was and will never return. The social impact is devastating. Detroit consistently ranks among the most dangerous cities in the United States, with homicide rates far above the national average. Poverty traps nearly 1/3 of the population, and unemployment remains alarming. Residents describe life here as a daily battle. "You never feel safe," says a mother of 2. "We lock our doors, but the fear never goes away." Attempts at revitalization, new stadiums, art projects, technological investments have failed to reach the majority of residents. The gap between the few who prosper and the vast majority who sink into misery widens every year. 9. St. Louis in Missouri. The city of violence. St. Louis was once the proud gateway to the West, a city of commerce, culture and expansion. Its iconic gateway arch symbolized opportunity and progress, but in the year 2026, St. Louis is known for something very different: violence. For years, St. Louis has topped the lists of the most dangerous cities in the United States. Homicide rates are staggering, driven by poverty, gang activity, and systemic inequality. Entire neighborhoods live under the shadow of fear. Walking through St. Louis is to feel tension in the air. Streets empty out after dark, businesses close early, and families avoid public spaces. Schools barely manage to function, hospitals are overwhelmed, and the police lack sufficient resources. Residents describe the city as a place where hope has evaporated. "We don't let our kids play outside," says a father of 3. "It's too dangerous. Every week, someone gets shot." Economic decline reinforces the despair. Factories closed long ago, jobs disappeared, and poverty spread like wildfire. Infrastructure crumbles, streets full of potholes, abandoned buildings, failing public services. Before continuing this journey through the ghost towns that are disappearing in the United States, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. That way you'll always stay well informed and be able to make the best decisions for your future while we continue discovering together how the map of this country is changing day by day. 8. Baltimore, Maryland. The city trapped between inequality and abandonment. Baltimore has always had two faces. On one hand, its historic port and proximity to Washington made it a strategic center of commerce and culture. On the other, its poorest neighborhoods have been the stage for decades of violence, corruption, and institutional neglect. In the year 2026, Baltimore finds itself at a critical point. It is a city where daily life has become a constant struggle against insecurity, economic precariousness, and lack of opportunity. Walking through Baltimore is to experience brutal contrasts. Downtown, with its modern buildings and tourist areas, seems to prosper. But just a few blocks away lies a landscape of empty houses, deteriorated streets, and shuttered businesses. Residents of these neighborhoods describe the feeling of living in a forgotten place, where the state barely exists, and violence dictates the rhythm of daily life. Baltimore's economy reflects this fracture. While some sectors linked to health and education generate jobs, most of the population faces low wages, chronic unemployment, and a cost of living that does not match their income. Housing prices have risen in recent years, driven by gentrification in certain areas, but wages have not kept pace. This has created a paradox. In a city with thousands of abandoned houses, living decently has become increasingly expensive. Violence is another factor that makes Baltimore uninhabitable. Homicide and crime rates are among the highest in the country. Young people grow up in an environment where gangs and drug trafficking offer more stability than school or work. Parents live with the constant fear of losing their children on any given street corner. The social impact is devastating. Public schools are collapsing, lacking resources and teachers who abandon their posts due to low salaries. Hospitals, though recognised for their quality in some sectors, fail to serve the most vulnerable population, who lack health insurance or the means to pay for treatment. Baltimore is a clear example of how economic inequality and lack of public investment can destroy a city from within. In the year 2026, it has become a place where nobody should live, not because it lacks history or culture, but because daily life has turned into a battle against poverty, violence, and despair. 7. Jackson, Mississippi, the capital that ran out of water. Jackson, the capital of Mississippi, should be a political and economic hub of relevance in the southern United States. However, in the year 2026, Jackson has become a symbol of urban collapse. The city faces an infrastructure crisis so severe that its residents have come to live without reliable access to drinking water. The water crisis in Jackson is not new. For years, aging pipes and lack of investment in the distribution system caused leaks, outages, and contamination. On several occasions, residents were forced to boil water before consuming it, and at other times, there was simply no water available. This situation which should be unthinkable in a start capital, has become the norm. The economic impact is brutal. Without reliable water, businesses cannot operate normally. Restaurants close, factories reduce production, and shops lose customers. Residents spend hundreds of extra dollars each month on bottled water, a cost that adds to already low wages. Poverty, which affects much of the population, deepens with every water outage. Jackson's infrastructure reflects decades of neglect. Streets are full of potholes, public buildings deteriorate, and basic services function intermittently. Residents describe the city as a place where the government has abandoned its responsibility. "Here we live as if we were forgotten," says one neighbour. "We pay taxes, but we get nothing in return." Violence and insecurity are also part of the picture. Although Jackson does not reach the homicide rates of cities like St. Louis or Baltimore, the sense of insecurity is constant. Poorer neighbourhoods lack effective police presence and residents live in fear of thefts and assaults. The social impact is devastating. Public schools suffer water outages that force classes to be suspended. Hospitals struggle to maintain adequate sanitary conditions. Families, trapped between poverty and lack of basic services, are forced to leave the city in search of safer and more livable places. Jackson is a reminder that infrastructure is the backbone of any community. When water, that essential resource for life, disappears, the entire city collapses. In the year 2026, Jackson has become a place where nobody should live, not because it lacks history or culture, but because survival itself is at risk. 6. Gary, Indiana, the fallen giant of steel. Gary, in the state of Indiana, was for much of the 20th century a symbol of America's industrial power. Founded by the United States Steel Corporation, the city grew around steel factories that employed tens of thousands of people. At its peak, Gary had more than 200,000 residents, with vibrant neighbourhoods, full schools, and a cultural life that reflected the prosperity of the working class. The city was a hive of activity. Trains loaded with steel crossed its tracks. Workers left the factories with faces blackened by coal, and families gathered in parks and theatres that thrived thanks to their money in circulation. Gishri was an example of the American industrial dream, a place where hard work guaranteed stability and a future. But that golden era is long gone. With the decline of the steel industry beginning in the 1970s, Gary started losing jobs and population. Factories closed, wages collapsed, and families emigrated to other cities in search of opportunities. The exodus was so massive that entire neighbourhoods were left empty within just a few years. Today, in the year 2026, the population barely exceeds 70,000 residents, and much of the city is marked by abandonment. Walking through Gari is to wander through a landscape of industrial ruins. The enormous steel factories remain rusted, with broken windows and collapsed roofs. The working-class neighbourhoods, once full of life, now show empty houses, silent streets, and closed schools. Community parks are deserted and local businesses barely survive with a handful of customers. The echo of what once was can be felt at every corner. A closed cinema with faded posters, a church with sealed doors, a stadium that once vibrated with crowds and now rusts in silence. The social impact is devastating. Violence increased as poverty deepened, and Gary became one of the cities with the highest crime rates in the country. The residents who still remain describe the experience as living in a place where the future has evaporated. Everything here depended on steel, says one neighbour. When it ended, the city ended too. Hopelessness is reflected in the faces of those who still fight to keep their homes standing, surrounded by empty streets and ruined buildings. The local government faces a permanent financial crisis. Taxes that once came from the industry no longer exist, and maintaining basic services means spending more than what is collected. Deficits grow, and authorities must decide between cutting services or going deeper into debt. The police lack resources, schools operate with minimal budgets, and hospitals struggle to care for an increasingly vulnerable population. The Midwest climate reinforces the sense of abandonment. Cold winters intensify the loneliness of a town that is falling apart, while hot summers make the deterioration of structures even more evident. Gary, once a symbol of prosperity, is now a reminder that no industry is eternal. 5. Las Vegas, Nevada. The illusion that dries up in the desert. Las Vegas is known worldwide as the city of entertainment, the place where casinos never sleep and neon lights illuminate the desert night. For decades, it was a symbol of excess, luxury, and fun. Millions of tourists arrived every year, drawn by the promise of fortune and spectacle. But in the year 2026, Las Vegas faces an existential threat that goes beyond the gaming economy: the lack of water. Located in the middle of the Nevada desert, the city depends on the Colorado River and Lake Mead to supply its population and millions of visitors. However, climate change and excessive consumption have drastically reduced water levels, putting the very viability of the city at risk. Walking through Las Vegas is to experience a disturbing contrast. The Strip still shines with luxury hotels and dazzling shows. But behind that facade, residential neighborhoods face water cuts, restrictions, and a rising cost of living. Residents describe the feeling of living in a city that is slowly drying up, where each summer is hotter and each year water becomes scarcer. The economy of Las Vegas depends almost exclusively on tourism and gambling. This makes it an extremely vulnerable city to crises. When the pandemic hit, the city lost thousands of jobs and millions in revenue. In 2026, although tourism has partially recovered, the threat of water makes Las Vegas unsustainable. Hotels spend millions on recycling and conservation system, but ordinary residents must pay increasingly higher bills for a resource that should be basic. The social impact is profound. Low-income families are forced to leave the city because they cannot afford water or electricity. Poorer neighbourhoods suffer constant outages, while tourist areas receive priority. This creates brutal inequality. While visitors enjoy pools and fountains, residents struggle to fill a glass of water. Extreme weather reinforces the sense of fragility. Summers reach temperatures above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and heat waves become more frequent and dangerous. Hospitals report an increase in cases of dehydration and heat stroke, especially among the elderly and children. The great lesson Las Vegas leaves is that no city can survive without water. The illusion of entertainment and luxury fades when the reality of the desert imposes itself. In the year 2026, Las Vegas becomes a place where nobody should live, not because it lacks spectacle, but because survival itself is at risk. 4. New Orleans, Louisiana. The city that drowns in water and inequality. New Orleans has always been a symbol of culture, music and resilience. Its streets vibrated with jazz, its carnivals were celebrations of life, and its port made it a vital centre for southern commerce. However, in the year 2026, New Orleans faces a threat that goes beyond nostalgia. The city is literally drowning under the weight of water and inequality. The memory of Hurricane Katrina is still alive, not as an isolated tragedy, but as the beginning of an endless cycle of vulnerability. Each hurricane season exposes the city's fragility. The levees, though reinforced, do not guarantee absolute safety. Floods repeat themselves. The poorest neighbourhoods are the most affected, and families who cannot flee remain trapped in an environment where nature and government negligence combine to destroy. The economy of New Orleans reflects this fragility. Tourism remains an important engine, but it depends on infrastructure that deteriorates with every storm. Hotels spend millions on repairs, while ordinary residents face insurance bills that are impossible to pay. The cost of living rises, but wages remain stagnant. The poorest neighbourhoods, especially those inhabited by African American and immigrant communities, suffer the worst. Destroyed homes, interrupted basic services, and an increasingly uncertain future. Walking through New Orleans is to feel the mix of beauty and despair. The French Quarter still attracts visitors, but just a few blocks away you find flooded streets, abandoned houses, and families living in fear of the next storm. Residents describe the city as a place where life is a gamble against the climate. "Here we don't know if tomorrow we'll still have a home," says a mother who lost her house twice to floods. The social impact is devastating. Schools close for weeks due to infrastructure damage. Hospitals collapse when storms interrupt the power supply, and public services barely manage to stay afloat. Violence, fueled by poverty, adds to the picture, turning New Orleans into a city where insecurity comes not only from the sky, but also from the streets. The great lesson New Orleans leaves is that no city can survive when nature and inequality combine. In the year 2026, it becomes a place where nobody should live, not because it lacks culture, but because life itself has become a constant struggle against water, poverty, and abandonment. Before revealing the last 3 ghost towns that are disappearing in the United States, remember to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. That way you'll keep discovering unique stories and avoid costly decisions in the future. While together we explore how the map of this country is slowly being erased. 3. Miami, Florida. The paradise that sinks beneath luxury and the sea. Miami is known worldwide as a tropical paradise, a center of luxury, tourism, and nightlife. Its beaches, skyscrapers, and cultural diversity made it one of the most attractive cities in the United States. However, in the year 2026, Miami faces a deadly paradox. It is a place where luxury coexists with the constant threat of the advancing sea. Climate change has transformed Miami into a symbol of vulnerability. Rising sea levels flood entire neighborhoods, especially those inhabited by low-income families. High tides turn streets into improvised canals, and tropical storms destroy infrastructure that was never designed to withstand this level of threat. Miami's economy reflects this contradiction. On one hand, tourism and the luxury real estate market continue to thrive. Millionaires buy waterfront properties, while developers build ever taller towers. On the other hand, ordinary residents face an impossible cost of living. flood insurance exceeding $1,500 per month, skyrocketing rents, and wages that cannot cover basic needs. Walking through Miami is to experience a brutal contrast. In South Beach, tourists enjoy parties and luxury hotels. But in neighborhoods like Little Haiti or Liberty City, families live in fear of losing everything in the next storm. Residents describe the city as a place where luxury is a facade that hides despair. Here the rich build towers and we lose our homes, says a neighbor who has seen his neighborhood flood every year. The social impact is devastating. Schools suffer constant damage from floods, hospitals face power outages during storms, and public services struggle to stay afloat. Violence, fueled by inequality, adds to the picture, turning Miami into a city where insecurity comes both from the sea and from the streets. Extreme weather reinforces the sense of fragility. Summers are increasingly hot, storms more intense, and the sea advances without stopping. Experts warn that if the trend continues, much of Miami could be underwater in the coming decades. The great lesson Miami leaves is that luxury cannot hide the reality of climate change. In the year 2026, it becomes a place where nobody should live, not because it lacks beauty, but because survival itself is at risk. 2. Phoenix, Arizona, the city that breaks under the sun. Phoenix, the capital of Arizona, was for decades an example of urban growth in the desert. Its expansion seemed unstoppable. Residential neighborhoods sprang up like mirages, shopping centers flourished, and the promise of a sunny lifestyle attracted thousands of families and retirees. However, in the year 2026, Phoenix has become a symbol of the limits of urbanization in a hostile environment. Extreme heat is the silent enemy that devours the city. Temperatures regularly exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit in summer, and heat waves have become longer and deadlier. Hospitals report a constant increase in cases of dehydration and heat stroke, especially among the elderly and children. Daily life becomes a struggle against the climate. Going outside at certain hours of the day is a risk, and electricity bills for air conditioning reach impossible figures for low-income families. Phoenix's economy reflects this fragility. Real estate growth, which was once a driver of prosperity, now faces a dilemma. Who wants to buy a house in a place where the heat can kill? Housing prices have begun to stagnate, while insurance against fires and climate damage skyrockets. Companies spend millions on cooling systems, and ordinary residents must choose between paying for electricity or buying food. Water is another critical factor. Phoenix depends on the Colorado River, whose basin is in crisis due to climate change and over-exploitation. Supply cuts affect both households and industries, and residents describe the feeling of living in a city that is slowly drying up. "Here the sun burns us and the water disappears," says one neighbor. "It's like living in an oven with no way out." The social impact is devastating. Poorer neighborhoods suffer power outages during heat waves, turning their homes into deadly traps. Schools close due to unsafe conditions. Hospitals collapse in summer, and families are forced to leave the city in search of more habitable places. Violence, fueled by desperation, adds to the picture. Water thefts, supermarket looting during power outages, and an atmosphere of insecurity that reinforces the sense of collapse. Phoenix is a reminder that no city can indefinitely defy nature. And the year 2026 it becomes a place where nobody should live, not because it lacks opportunities, but because survival itself is at risk under the relentless desert sun. 1. Chicago, Illinois. The metropolis that bleeds out in inequality. Chicago, the third largest city in the United States, has always been a symbol of economic and cultural power. Its skyscrapers dominate the horizon. Its history is marked by industry and commerce, and its cultural diversity made it a vibrant centre. However, in the year 2026, Chicago faces a crisis that transforms it into a place where daily life has become unsustainable. Violence and inequality have turned the metropolis into an urban battlefield. Homicide rates in Chicago are alarming. Entire neighbourhoods, especially in the south and west of the city, live under the control of gangs and drug trafficking. Residents describe the feeling of living in a war zone, where leaving home can mean risking your life. "Here we don't know if we'll make it back at the end of the day," says a young man who lost his brother in a shooting. Chicago's economy reflects this fracture. While the financial and tourist centre prospers, poor neighbourhoods sink into misery. The cost of living rises, rents skyrocket, and wages are not enough to cover basic needs. Low-income families spend much of their income on housing and transportation, while public services deteriorate. The gap between rich and poor widens every year, turning Chicago into an extreme example of urban inequality. Walking through Chicago is to experience a brutal contrast. Downtown, with its skyscrapers and luxury restaurants, seems to thrive. But just a few blocks away you find empty streets, abandoned houses, and families living in fear. Residents describe the city as a place where the future has evaporated. "Here everything depends on where you live," says a mother. "If you're downtown, you have opportunities. If you're in the south, you only have fear." The social impact is devastating. Public schools in poor neighbourhoods lack resources, hospitals face constant overload, and the police struggle to control violence. Residents live trapped between insecurity and lack of opportunity, creating an endless cycle of poverty and despair. Extreme weather reinforces the sense of fragility. Cold winters intensify the loneliness of abandoned neighbourhoods, while hot summers make the deterioration of structures even more evident. Chicago, once a symbol of prosperity, is now a reminder that no metropolis can survive when inequality and violence become its identity. The great lesson Chicago leaves is clear. When a city bleeds out in inequality, daily life becomes an impossible battle. In the year 2026, Chicago transforms into a place where nobody should live, not because it lacks history or culture, but because survival itself is at risk on every corner. And so, after this journey through 10 ghost towns in the United States, places where everyday life fades away and communities shut down in the year 2026, the big question arises. Which of these cities strikes you as the most impactful at first sight? I would love to hear your opinion. Have you visited any of them, lived in any of them, or do you know someone who has? Any experience or information you share in the comments could be invaluable for those seeking to better understand what life is like in these places where abundance turned into emptiness. And speaking of helping, it might also be useful to watch the video I'm about to show you. Because, as you know, staying informed is key, and for that, nothing beats subscribing to the channel and leaving a like so we can continue exploring together the most surprising, and sometimes most unsettling. Places where life seems to stop, even though the houses are ready to be lived in.